Meeting of the committee will come to order. We'll close the doors. Before proceeding to our scheduled business today, I wish to recognize the sad passing of one of our dear colleagues, the gentle lady from Virginia, Joanne Davis. Ms. Davis was a valued member of this committee. She showed a strong and passionate commitment to U.S. foreign policy, closely following our activities even as she battled her illness. She served as chair of the United States Congressional Delegation of the Transatlantic Legislators Dialogue from 2003 to 2006, leading meetings with members of the European Parliament in Rome, Dublin, and Vienna, as well as several here in the United States. I know I speak for all members of our committee when I say that Joanne will be deeply missed by many on the international scene, as well as by all of her colleagues here in Congress. Would my colleague like to say a few words?
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. And today I also would like to join so many of our colleagues in honoring and remembering our departed colleague and friend, Congresswoman Joanne Davis of Virginia. As the two Republican women on this committee, Joanne and I worked together on many issues of great importance for our country, the United States. I was honored to witness the extent of her devotion to the people of her district, her Commonwealth, and her beloved country. People commonly use the term public servant to refer to those who hold elective office. As members of Congress, we try our best to live up to that title. But, Mr. Chairman, Joanne Davis personified it. She was, at her essence, a public servant. Simply by being elected, Joanne made history by being the first Republican woman from Virginia to serve in the House of Representatives. Not content to rest on her laurels, Joanne proceeded to commit herself unyieldingly to America's national security. A minority of members of Congress served on the committees on foreign affairs, armed services, or intelligence. During her tragically short 7-year tenure, Joanne served on all three committees and with great distinction, including her present position as ranking member of the Armed Services Subcommittee on Readiness and as a member of the Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on Western Hemisphere, as well as on the Middle East and South Asia Subcommittee. As a member of our Foreign Affairs Committee, Joanne not only co-sponsored legislation and attended numerous hearings on pressing national security matters, but she dedicated herself to the vital yet often overlooked Atlantic Alliance, leading delegations of representatives to meet with our counterparts in the European Parliament through the Transatlantic Legislators Dialogue from the years 2003 to 2006. Just this past weekend, Mr. Chairman, the Transatlantic Legislators Dialogue met, and her presence was greatly missed. At this time, what we feel most is an overwhelming sense of loss, a personal loss for our committee, a loss for our Congress, a loss for our country. Our thoughts and our hearts are, of course, with her husband, Chuck, and her 2 sons, her granddaughter, and her entire family. But as we mourn and miss her, we can take comfort in the knowledge that ours is and remains a world in which someone like Joanne Davis can exist and indeed make a difference. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank my colleague for her eloquent statement, and I now ask for a moment of silence in memory of our departed colleague, Joanne Davis. Thank you.
Thank you.
Where is he? On a happier note, I want to welcome back to the committee the gentleman from Missouri, the distinguished minority whip, my good friend Mr. Blunt, who was appointed today to replace Ms. Davis. We are delighted and honored to have you, Mr. Blunt. Pursuant to notice, I call up the bill H.Res 106, calling upon the President to ensure that the foreign policy of the United States reflects appropriate understanding and sensitivity concerning issues related to human rights, ethnic cleansing, and genocide documented in the United States record relating to the Armenian Genocide and for other purposes, for purposes of markup. Without objection, the resolution is considered as read, and I yield myself such time as I might consume. Today, we are not considering whether the Armenian people were persecuted and died in huge numbers at the hands of Ottoman troops in the early 20th century. There is unanimity in the Congress and across the country that these atrocities took place. If the resolution before us stated that fact alone, it would pass unanimously. The controversy lies in whether to make it United States policy at this moment in history to apply a single word, genocide, to encompass this enormous blot on human history. The United Nations Convention on Genocide defines the term as a number of actions, and I quote, committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group, end quote. These actions include killing or causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, and deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. Henry Morgenthau, the U.S. ambassador to the Ottoman Empire at the time of the atrocities, wrote, and I'm quoting, I am confident that the whole history of the human race contains no such horrible episode as this. The great massacres and persecutions of the past seem almost insignificant when compared with the sufferings of the Armenian race in 1915. End quote. The leadership of the United States has been in universal agreement in condemning the atrocities, but has been divided about using the term genocide. On one occasion, President Ronald Reagan referred to, I quote, the genocide of the Armenians. But subsequent presidents, George Herbert Walker Bush, Bill Clinton, and George W. Bush, have refrained from using the word out of deference to Turkish sentiments on the matter. In recognizing this tragedy, some in Congress have seen common themes with the debate our committee held earlier this year on a resolution about another historic injustice, the tens of thousands of so-called comfort women forced into sexual slavery by Imperial Japan. The current Japanese government went to great lengths to attempt to prevent debate on that matter, and dire predictions were made that passage of such a resolution would harm U.S.-Japan relations. Those dire consequences never materialized. A key feature distinguishing today's debate from the one on the Comfort Women resolution is that U.S. troops are currently engaged in wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Our troops depend on a major Turkish air base for access to the fighting fronts, and it serves as a critical part of the supply lines to those fronts. A growing majority in Congress, and I am among them, strongly oppose continued U.S. troop involvement in the civil war in Iraq. But none of us wants to see those supply lines threatened or abruptly cut. All 8 living former secretaries of state recently cautioned Congress on this matter, and I quote, "It is our view," write former Secretaries Albright, Baker, Christopher, Eagleburger, Haig, Kissinger, Powell, and Schultz, that passage of this resolution could endanger our troops in Iraq and Afghanistan and damage efforts to promote reconciliation between Armenia and Turkey. End quote. 3 former Secretaries of Defense, Carlucci, Cohen, and Perry, this week advised Congress that passage of this resolution, and I quote again, would have a direct detrimental effect on the operational capabilities, safety, and well-being of our armed forces in Iraq and in Afghanistan. End quote. Members of this committee have a sobering choice to make. We have to weigh the desire to express our solidarity with the Armenian people and to condemn this historic nightmare through the use of the word genocide against the risk that it could cause young men and women in the uniform of the United States Armed Services to pay an even heavier price than they are currently paying. This is a vote of conscience, and the committee will work its will. I understand that the distinguished ranking Republican member, Ilyana Ros-Lehtinen, may not wish to make an opening statement. You will. I'm delighted to yield to my friend and colleague.
Thank you, Mr.
Florida.
Chairman, because I know that so many members wish to make opening statements and we have competing committee responsibilities. I was not going to make an opening statement, but I know that this is such a serious issue for so many, and I want to thank you for yielding me the time. And certainly the death of 1.5 million Armenians at the hands of the officials of the Ottoman Empire is a dark and horrific chapter in our human history. This committee's consideration of House Resolution 106, affirmation of the United States record on the Armenian Genocide resolution, is a very serious matter, particularly at this time, Mr. Chairman. This is a difficult issue, as you pointed out in your opening statement, and one where we must carefully evaluate a number of factors, including our commitment to justice and historical facts, the best strategy to advance reconciliation between Armenia and Turkey, as well as security interests that are so critical to the United States. As we discuss the resolution before us today, it is incumbent upon each and every one of us to carefully consider all of the factors and the possible implications involved in moving forward with this particular resolution at this particular time in the war that we are engaged in against Islamic extremists. I will vote against the resolution because of the damage to our capabilities in Iraq and in Afghanistan, where my daughter-in-law is serving as a United States military officer. It could damage our operations against Islamic extremists and our counter-narcotics efforts in South Asia and Central Asia. and to ensure that all of our members have ample opportunities to express their support, Mr. Chairman, or raise concern about this measure, I will yield back the balance of my time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. It is the intention of the Chair that all members who wish to speak on this resolution will be recognized for 5 minutes. I now recognize one of the original co-sponsors of H.Res 106, the gentleman from California, Mr. Sherman, for 5 minutes to explain the resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your outstanding review of history. My colleagues, we are here again considering an Armenian Genocide resolution. Our committee has done this 3 times in the last decade, and once the Judiciary Committee dealt with a resolution crafted to meet its jurisdiction. We have never had a vote on the floor. And there are those that say that every time we discuss this resolution in committee, it's an irritant to our relationship with Turkey. That's the best reason to vote for it here and on the floor. Let us do this and be done with it. We will get a few angry words out of Ankara for a few days, and then it's over. And I promise that the proponents of this resolution will not be back with another resolution after the House recognizes the Armenian Genocide. In contrast, if we vote down this resolution today, the some 225-plus co-sponsors will be back next year and the year after. If this irritates our relationship with Turkey, let's stop the irritation by recognizing the truth. 2 years ago, we dealt with an identical resolution. The history is the same. The words of the resolution are exactly the same. The geopolitical situation is the same. Turkey has the same border with Iraq that it had 2 years ago. This committee role is the same, which is to speak truth on human rights abuses even when our friends object. And we prove that again with regard to those called comfort women, which the chairman referred to. Only one thing has changed, and that is a ferocious lobbying effort has been brought to this committee. 2 years ago, we passed this exact same resolution, 40-7, and we ought to have a similar vote here today. What happened in 1915 to 1923? The population of Armenians in the area now encompassed by Turkey was some 2 million. 8 years later, it was virtually 0. Our ambassador to the Ottoman Empire, which the chairman quoted, said it clearly when he said, when the authorities gave the orders for these deportations, they were merely giving the death warrant to a whole race. They understood this well, and in their conversations with me, they made no particular attempt to conceal that fact. Or we can turn to Mustafa Arif, the last minister of the interior of the Ottoman Empire, speaking just after World War I and reflecting on the recent actions of his own government. He said, our wartime leaders decided to exterminate the Armenians, and they did exterminate them. This clearly meets the United Nations definition and every other definition of genocide, and in fact the human rights attorney who coined the word genocide applied it directly to the Armenian genocide. It is right for Congress to recognize this genocide. We must do it. Genocide denial is not just the last step of a genocide, it is the first step in the next genocide. When Hitler had to convince his cohorts that the world would let them get away with it, he turned to them and said, who today speaks of the annihilation of the Armenians? Opponents say that Turkey will be angry if we pass this resolution. Japan lobbied against a resolution the chairman referred to. This committee has passed resolutions criticizing such great allies as England and Canada. But let me give you a hypothetical. Say there's a new regime in Germany with a different view of world history that demands that we tear down the Holocaust Museum. Who would go to the floor and say, we need Ramstadt Air Force Base in Germany, let's tear down the Holocaust Museum? We cannot provide genocide denial as one of the perks of friendship with the United States. We are told that if we pass this resolution, Turkey will react. Turkey's long-standing practice is to try to win through intimidation, but every time a resolution is passed, they then get on with it. Despite threats of harsh retribution, Turkey has either taken no steps or only token diplomatic steps against so many nations that have officially recognized the Armenian Genocide, including Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Belgium, and Argentina. Some 40 United States states have recognized the Armenian Genocide, and trade between those individual states and Turkey has blossomed, including my own state of California. The best example is the big battle in the French Parliament. In 2001, Turkey threatened France with a boycott of French goods. The result? France passed the genocide resolution, and Turkey's imports from France skyrocketed, tripled as shown in this chart, in just a few years. In addition, Turkey's bilateral trade increased significantly.
The gentleman's time has expired.
With so many other countries that have adopted the Armenian Genocide resolution.
I recognize the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Smith.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, in September of 2000, I chaired a hearing on the Armenian Genocide Resolution, H.Res. 398, that had been introduced by Mr. Radonovich, Mr. Bonnier, and Mr. Rogan. It was the first hearing this House had ever held on the Armenian Genocide. Great lengths and great pains were taken to be accurate, to provide information that could be proven on the record, and yet there was a major effort undertaken not even to have the hearing at all. The resolution, as I think all of us know, never made it to the floor. In that case, the Clinton White House had weighed in and they blocked it. The issues behind the resolution today is whether any government denies a genocide, whether or not Congress has a responsibility to insist that our government, at the very least, acknowledge it. Mr. Chairman, I believe that we do. In 1915, there were about 2 million Armenians living in what was then the Ottoman Empire. They were living in a region that they had inhabited for 2,500 years. By 1923, well over 90% of these Armenians had disappeared. Most of them, as many as 1.5 million, were dead. The remainder had been forced into exile. The government of the empire, whose leaders were members of the movement known as the Young Turks, called this campaign against the Armenians a mass deportation, rather than the mass murder that it was. And the United States ambassador to Turkey at the time, Henry Morgenthau, called it a campaign of race extermination. The British, French, and Russian governments accused the Young Turk government of crimes against humanity, the first time in history that charge had ever been made by one state against another. After World War I, the term genocide didn't exist, but the whole world understood what had been done to the Armenians and who had done it. The government of Turkey tried and convicted a number of high-ranking Young Turk officials for their role in the Turkish government's indictment and what they called the massacre and destruction of their Armenians. Unfortunately, Mr. Chairman, memories fade, and later generations chose another course. Now there are many who deny that the Armenian Genocide ever happened. Today in Turkey, and I would ask members to look at the country reports on human rights practices, the State Department chronicling of abuse. There is one journalist, one novelist after another, who is indicted in Turkey for simply talking about the Armenian Genocide. Hopefully, members will not be deterred from voting for this resolution. There are members now, or people in Turkey, who say that what happened during wartime, or was the fault of both sides, or that the Armenians sympathized with the enemies of the Ottoman Empire, or that the atrocities were the random acts of a few people, not authorized by the central government. Yet after World War I, the Turkish government's indictment said that the destruction of the Armenians was, quote, the result of the decision-making of the Central Committee. In other words, it was planned, it was premeditated, and they carried it out with terrible and horrific consequences. The sad truth is that the modern government of Turkey refuses to come to terms with this genocide. The Turkish government consistently and aggressively refuses to acknowledge the Armenian Genocide. For Armenians everywhere, the Turkish government's denial is yet another slap in the face. It is this denial that keeps the Armenian Genocide a burning issue. Even in our own country, a conspiracy of obfuscation and expediency tries to muffle any acknowledgement of the Armenian Genocide. Whenever the issue threatens to surface in Congress, there is a full court press to try to stop it from coming to the fore. I would note here that members of the House, Democrats and Republicans, are friends of Turkey. I consider myself a friend of Turkey. But friends don't let friends commit crimes against humanity, genocide, and then act as witting or unwitting accomplices in their denial after they have committed it. I recall to you that in judging the post-World War I case against the prime movers of this genocide, the Turkish president of the court stated, and I quote, Perpetration of such atrocities is not only incompatible with Ottoman laws and the Constitution, but also is contrary to the dictates of our Muslim faith. I admire him for saying this. He said this for the good of Turkey, and his words were patriotic. Today in Turkey, those kind of words would get you indicted and perhaps prosecuted and thrown into prison. Before he launched the Holocaust, as my friend Mr. Sherman said a moment ago, Adolf Hitler sneered, and he said, "Who today remembers the Armenians?" I recently visited Srebrenica, Mr. Chairman, during the July break, and like you and like members on both sides of the aisle, are very sorry that there are genocides that have occurred in the 20th century, like Rwanda, Darfur, which is ongoing, Bosnia, at Srebrenica. 8,000 Bosnians.
Gentleman's time has expired.
I would ask, Mr. Chairman, that members realize or vote for this resolution, and we need to tell our friends in Turkey and Ankara that we speak truth to power. Yield back the balance.
I'm pleased to call on the gentleman from New York, Mr. Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would first like to recognize 4 people who have joined us today. 2 of them are from my district, from the Armenian home in Flushing, New York. Peruz Kaluzdian. She was born in 1909, Harput, Turkey, and is 98 years old. Onrik Eminian, who was born in 1912 in Izmir, Turkey, and is 95. Yuretscreen Shirapi Koyan, who was born in Istanbul, Turkey. Ashkoy Jalian Basilian, who was born in Ofra, Turkey, who is 93 years old and is from Mr. Pallon's district, who is with us today. As their age would indicate, each is an Armenian survivor who have longed to be someplace like this on this day. I'd ask them just to raise their hands because I won't ask them to stand. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, this is a very agonizing issue, and it's made as agonizing it is by your very fair summary of the history and the equities, because there are equities on either side that one might choose to vote, and I'm sure we've all given this a lot of thought, and we've come to different conclusions. This has been tough for me. I'm a big fan and supporter of Turkey. Turkey, as you point out, is a very important ally, plays a very important geopolitical role, plays a role in the war against terror, is with us at a time when timing is very, very important and when so much is at stake. They are possibly the best example in the world in which they live of the things that we would like to see countries begin to become. And yet there is equity on the other side as well. We've indeed been told the timing is bad. All the years that I've been here, the timing was always bad, and I can't think of a time when the timing is not going to be bad. But the timing was bad for the Armenian people in 1915, and nothing is going to change that either. The real question is a word, the word genocide. You've defined it as the UN has defined it, Mr. Chairman, and I suppose that's the legal definition that we stand by. I just don't know how much of a people has to be destroyed before that word can really be applied. Is there a percentage? If another 1,000 Armenians were murdered, would it then have been a genocide? Maybe 10,000 more? Our friends in Turkey have to understand that they can get beyond this. And I know how emotional an issue this is with them. Hard for us to understand, but we try. We've gotten beyond the idea that we were fairly genocidal with the Native Americans as we chased them across our movie screens. We have to understand, and Turkey has to understand as well, that Turkey is no more the Ottoman Empire than today's Germany is the Third Reich. We've gotten beyond that with the understanding and admission of things that we've done that are wrong, and we are then empowered, freed, and enabled to move on as others have in the world. This is as much a disenabling fact in the history of Turkey and before then the Ottoman Empire than anything else. And I think that full confronting of this issue by our Turkish friends will certainly enable them to move forward. We've heard some people say that this would be very damaging to our efforts that are underway today.
The gentleman's time has
More
expired.
damaging than anything else, I believe, Mr. Chairman, would be the damage done by us denying the truth. Thank you.
I call on the gentleman from India, Mr. Burton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, we have a lot of resolutions that come before this committee. Some are important and some are not so important, but we debate those. But I can't remember an issue that's more important than the one we're talking about today. In my opinion, stability in the entire Middle East could be at risk. There's no question that thousands and thousands of people were killed during the time period we're talking about. That was over 90 years ago. And right now, there's a conflict in Afghanistan, there's a conflict in Iraq, there's a conflict that's going on off and on in Lebanon, and the West Bank, all over that area. It's a tinderbox. And right next door, we've got Iran, who's trying to develop a nuclear capability, and our strongest ally in the area, the strongest ally in the area, and has been for over 50 years, is Turkey. And I just don't understand why we're going to cut our nose off, shoot ourselves in the foot at a time when we need this ally. War is hell. War is terrible. And I feel awful about these things that happen. I think everybody does. But the problem is, why are we doing this at this particular time? I've heard the arguments on the other side, well, they'll bring it up again and again. That's all right. They have the right to do that. But we're in the middle of two wars right now, and the possibility of a nuclear exchange down the road if we aren't careful, and the problems that are going on in Israel and Lebanon. The French National Assembly passed a bill criminalizing denial of the Armenian Genocide. And Turkey severed all bilateral military and defense ties with France. What would happen if that happened to us? 75 to 80% of the war materials going into Iraq go through Turkey. Incirlik, that base. What if they cut us off there? How are we going to get supplies into our military? We've got thousands, over 100,000, 130,000 men there and women there. And yet we know right now that that is at risk if we pass this resolution. Now, the Turkish government and the Armenian government have been pursuing some kind of reconciliation for a long time. And they're right now including even the possibility of normalization of relations. The government of Turkey has made written and verbal offers to set up a commission outside both governments to look into the facts of what happened during this period and to come up with a resolution of it that's factual, based upon history. Not something that's an emotional thing that we're dealing with year in and year out in this chamber and in this room. 4/5 of the Turks, 80%, have said they would oppose helping the United States in Iraq and Afghanistan if this kind of resolution passes. The government of Turkey has already kicked France out. We're in the middle of two wars, and we've got troops out there, over there that are at risk. And we're talking about kicking the one ally that's helping us over there in the face right now. It just doesn't make any sense to me. 9 secretaries of state, the past 9, Democrats and Republicans, have said this is crazy. Our secretaries of defense have contacted us. Both Democrats and Republicans have said this is crazy. And it is. I understand the emotionalism. I understand the tragedy that occurred. I feel very bad about these ladies who are here today and these gentlemen who are here today who lived through part of that. It's regrettable. It's horrible that that happened. And I believe this ought to all be put in a historical way so that everybody can understand it. And that's why I think this commission, with both countries being involved and appointing people outside the government to look into the historical facts, should be established, and we should see this come to an end. But to come to an end like this right now jeopardizes the security of our interests in the Middle East. We get a tremendous amount of our oil from the Middle East, and if that area blows up because we don't handle this right, we're going to really rue that day. And it could lead to a war that's much, much wider than we've seen so far. This is not the time. This is not the way to do this right now. And I hope my colleagues will rethink this before this vote comes up, because it's not just this resolution. It's the security of the Middle East that's at stake.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from American Samoa, Mr. Falomavega.
Mr. Chairman, no doubt just about every member of this committee has had an opportunity not only to review carefully the provisions of House Resolution 106, but to listen also to those who advocate passage of the bill, and others who strongly believe that approval of this legislation will seriously put to question our long-standing relationship with the government of Turkey. The issue of the Armenian Genocide is not new to this committee, and I want to commend my colleague and former member of this committee for his authorship of this bill, the gentleman from California, Mr. Schiff, and some 225 of our colleagues who have signed on as co-sponsors of this legislation. It's my understanding that many of Mr. Schiff's constituents are fellow Americans who are of Armenian ancestry, and I suspect the hundreds and thousands of Armenian Americans who are descendants of some 1.5 million Armenians who were displaced and killed during the time when the Ottoman Empire was breaking apart at the beginning of the First World War and years after. As you know, Mr. Chairman, the government of Turkey is very much opposed to this legislation, and so is President Bush and all the top officials of this administration. I do want to know for the record, Mr. Chairman, that for the past 60 years, our country has not had a better friend and ally than the people and leaders of Turkey. In my opinion, Turkey, as a committed member of our NATO alliance during the Cold War era, played a critical and most pivotal role in containing communism and limited Soviet influence in this important region of the world. And even today, our current efforts to stabilize the crisis in Iraq would have been worse had it not been for the assistance that we're getting from Turkey. It is without question that there is tremendous controversy as to whether there was a genocide committed by officials of the Ottoman Empire against the people of Armenia. And obviously it depends on who you talk to. Some have suggested that perhaps some kind of a bilateral or a multilateral international commission be established to conduct a comprehensive review of all the available documents and data to determine the facts. Others suggest that maybe it be brought before an international tribunal or court of justice to review this matter. Some have argued, why now? This is during the time of the Ottoman Empire was breaking apart. The government of Turkey today had nothing to do with what happened some 60 or 80 years ago. This is certainly true. But our own country is not without blemish. We can talk about the treatment of the indigenous Native Americans, the moral issue of slavery and the civil and voting rights of our African Americans, or the mass displacement of some 100,000 Japanese Americans during World War II, or the illegal or unlawful overthrow of the Kingdom of Hawaii ruled by Queen Liliuokalani. I submit, Mr. Chairman, our government took appropriate action to officially apologize to what we did to our fellow Americans who happen to be of Japanese ancestry, and even to those who happen to be of Hawaiian ancestry. Someone once said, Mr. Chairman, the greatness of a nation is not necessarily measured by its accomplishments, but by its ability to honestly face its mistakes of the past and then take appropriate action to correct them. Mr. Chairman, most recently our committee in the House also passed a resolution asking Japan to officially apologize and recognize the brutal treatment of some 200,000 women from Asia and the Pacific, women who were abducted and kidnapped by forced into sexual slavery by the military forces of the Imperial Army of Japan during World War II. It is only fair that we also recognize what happened to the 1.5 million Armenians who were systematically tortured and killed during the days of the Ottoman Empire. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I support this resolution. I respectfully ask my colleagues to do the same.
Thank you. And before recognizing my next colleague, let me state for the record that it is the intention of the Chair, irrespective of the outcome of the vote on this resolution, at the next markup to bring up a resolution of friendship with the Republic of Turkey. I now call on the gentleman from California, Mr. Rohrabacher.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank you and the ranking minority member for providing us I would say, a very, very thoughtful look at this issue, and it takes that. Every year, all of us are barraged by lobbyists, retired members of Congress, Turkish politicians, and citizen groups about this resolution. I always urge the Turks who come to see me, I always urge them to apologize. After all, we are talking about huge numbers of civilians who were slaughtered by the Turkish army, and there's no question about that. There's no debate about that fact. Huge numbers of civilians were slaughtered. I also point out when people come to talk to me about this issue that the Armenians also were killing civilians at that time. The killing of innocents didn't just happen on the Turkish side, but there is no doubt that the Turks were in control of the situation and that the slaughter of Armenians was overwhelming. The right message to both the Turks and the Armenians today is move on and put the past behind you. After all, what we're talking about is the Ottoman Empire and not the current government of Turkey. And the current government of Turkey is not accused of any of the crimes that we are discussing today. No one on either side who had any responsibility for that crisis and for the crimes that we're talking about, no one, not one of them is alive today. Nevertheless, this issue emerges every year. What makes this year different than the other times that we've faced this resolution? This year, this issue, if it passes through this committee, may well go to the floor. Also, this year, there's something else that I think has at least affected my decision-making, and that is the audacity that some Turks have had during this debate to threaten to cut logistic support for U.S. troops in Iraq. Isn't it enough that hundreds of our service members may have died due to Turkey's refusal to permit the 4th Infantry Division to transit through Turkey and enter Iraq at the beginning of the Iraq conflict? Isn't that enough? Isn't it enough that year after year the U.S. raises its voice for Turkey's application into the EU, much to the chagrin of some of our friends in Europe? Year after year, we actively encourage democracy and free elections in that country. Year after year, we do everything we can to urge the military in Turkey to stay out of politics and remain in their barracks. And perhaps, perhaps if we have to bend over backwards and continually doing favors and continually and ignore the truth, well, maybe Turkey isn't ready for EU membership if it demands that we base relationships on denying the truth. Perhaps they are not as good of friends of the United States as they profess if they are going to threaten to cut off American military troops after they already committed an action that cost our lives of our soldiers. The Germans apologized to the Jews, the Japanese apologized to the Koreans, the Chinese, the Filipinos, and of course the Chinese communists have never apologized to anybody for the slaughter that they've had. Well, why on earth should we encourage our friends like Turkey to mimic the dictators in Beijing rather than those countries that have turned democratic and tried to realize that you build a future based on truth? Turkey needs to act responsibly. Both the Armenians and the Turks need to close the chapter in this book. I urge my colleagues to support this resolution, to close the chapter, and let's get on with it and build a better world.
Gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Payne.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for calling this very important hearing. And let me say that the history and the facts are clear. I don't think that this question before us today has to do with genocide or not. The people that I hear who oppose this resolution are not questioning whether genocide occurred. That's clear. The end of the 800-year Ottoman Empire and the new emergence of what in 1915 was really the young Turks taking over, so it was sort of a cessation of the old Ottoman Empire and into the new leadership of Turkey. That genocide did occur. I don't think that anyone would deny, because even though it was in 48 when the United Nations Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of Crimes of Genocide defined genocide. Genocide means that killing of members of a group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of a group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in part or whole, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, and forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. Genocide did occur, there's no question about it. As a matter of fact, Adolf Hitler said in 1939, we all know that when he ordered his troops into Poland, he said, who, after all, speaks today of the annihilation of the Armenians? Because no one spoke out then, and if we continue to deny that it happened, we are denying history. And I think that the question has always been, and that's why it's never come up before, are we going to alienate our allies? Well, you know, when the Europeans did not support our preemptive strike in Iraq, you remember our Vice President Cheney said, oh, we got old Europe, and then there's new Europe, and these old Europe, they just don't see it. Now, Europeans were our allies, and we separated Europe, and Cheney boldly talked about old Europe, and they're behind in their thinking, they're archaic. What was wrong about insulting our so-called allies of old Europe, when now we're worried about what Turkey will take as action against us? And 20 countries in the world have declared genocide occurred there. 40 states in the United States of America has done so. The fact that we're more concerned about what Turkey will do. What's going to happen when Turkey attacks the Kurds in Iraq, where we for decades protected the Kurds from Saddam Hussein, and now what are we going to do, look the other way when Turkey says we will never allow a Kurdistan or the Kurds to be able to represent themselves? And so we should not allow our allies, we have a responsibility if we're going to be the leaders in this world, and we have tarnished ourselves, in my opinion, with preemptive strikes to countries like in Iraq. I think that we should stand up on principle. The question is whether genocide occurred or not. 10 years from now, if Turkey's turned against us, then it can pass. It doesn't change the facts. The facts are the facts, and that's what we should vote on, the facts. I support the resolution.
Gentleman from California, Mr. Royce.
Thank you, Chairman Lantos, and I'll be brief in my comments. I'm a original co-sponsor of this resolution. It's an issue I've worked on for many, many years. I'm old enough to have known some of the survivors while they were still alive of this genocide, and I've worked on this issue since I was a state senator in California. The original resolution that I introduced and passed in California a generation ago was this genocide resolution. And so we've had President Reagan speak out about the Armenian genocide. We have had a lot of water under the bridge, but I think now it's time for Congress to take action. This resolution focuses singularly on the United States record of the Armenian genocide. As the text indicates, our national archives are filled with thousands of pages documenting the premeditated extermination of the Armenian people. As the genocide was being committed, the U.S. launched a diplomatic effort, a political and a humanitarian campaign worldwide to end the carnage at that time. We should be proud of that effort. Yet, to this day, for a variety of reasons, we fail to recognize the events that began 90 years ago for what they are. Genocide is what those events were. And we have a chance to set the record straight. The U.S. has long been a global leader in promoting human rights around the world. We all know this. But on this issue, the issue of the Armenian genocide, we lag behind. The French, the Swiss, the Swedish, the Germans, even the Russian governments recognize the Armenian genocide. As a global leader in human rights, it is imperative for the United States to stand on principle and recognize the annihilation of the Armenians as genocide. Opponents ask why now. They warn of dire actions that Turkey might take against the United States if the resolution passes. But it is important that this committee doesn't lose sight between what is right and wrong and speak out about the wrongs in the world. While the Armenian genocide was the first of the 20th century, the blind eye cast to the slaughter of the Armenians was a point used by Hitler, who asked his Joint Chiefs of Staff, who speaks today of their annihilation. This was a point first made to me by my father, who served with 3rd Army and 7th Army as they cut through Germany. And when they got into Dachau, the concentration camp, he had his brother's camera, and he took photographs there of that genocide, of what happened in that genocide, of the human bodies that were in the baths and in the ovens and in the rail cars. And to this day, he still has to use those photographs with those who denied that that genocide ever occurred. And as he says, history is a continuum that affects today and tomorrow. It's much harder to get tomorrow right if we get yesterday wrong. The world's strength to oppose killing today is made greater by accountability for actions present but also past. And I want you to think for a minute about what could easily be said by the culpable leaders of the Khartoum government who continue their genocide in Darfur while denying that that's a genocide. So, frankly, it's weakened by denial of accountability and obfuscation of past acts. Not recognizing the Armenian genocide as such does just that. For the sake of the genocides past and present, I urge the passage of this bipartisan resolution. 1.5 million Armenians were murdered. 500,000 were removed from their homeland. Passing this resolution will be a victory for human rights. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Wexler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I speak in opposition to this resolution. I do so with deep reservations given the importance of this resolution to Armenian Americans. Over the past several years, I have joined with both the Clinton and Bush administrations in recognizing the tragedy that befell countless Armenians under the Ottoman Empire starting in 1915. No one disputes that this was one of the darkest chapters in the last century. However, as a member of Congress who wants to see lasting peace and reconciliation between Armenians and Turks, I strongly believe this resolution will further divide these two nations and peoples. I know it is not the objective of this resolution to create further tension between Turks and Armenians. However, the impact of its passage will surely deepen animosity, cripple efforts of those seeking reconciliation, and will inflame a region of the world already under great duress. I urge my colleagues to heed the words of Mesrab II, the spiritual leader of the Armenian Orthodox community in Turkey, who recently said the Armenian Genocide resolution pending in the United States Congress disrupts both the relations between Turkish people and Armenians in Turkey and between Turkey and Armenia. Mr. Chairman, passage of this resolution is not in the interest of our national security and will damage our long-standing relationship with our NATO ally, Turkey. As Secretaries Rice and Gates stated in their letter to Speaker Pelosi in March, the passage of this resolution will significantly endanger U.S. national security interests in the region. Their letter also calls Turkey an indispensable ally in Iraq, Afghanistan, and the Balkans, and states that we must recognize the important contributions Turkey is making to U.S. national security, as well as security and stability in the broader Middle East and Europe. Additionally, 8 former Secretaries of State and 3 Secretaries of Defense from the Clinton, Bush I, Reagan, and Ford administrations have all expressed their opposition to this resolution in the name of American national security interests and in support of reconciliation efforts between Armenians and Turks. It is clear that America can ill afford to lose the support of an ally as important as Turkey at this critical juncture. As the world's oldest Muslim-majority democracy, Turkey is an indispensable partner to our troops in Iraq and Afghanistan. In Iraq, Turkey provides American troops access to its airspace, military bases, ports, as well as its border crossing into Iraq. Turkey is a linchpin in the transshipment of vital cargo and fuel resources to American troops and coalition partners. Incirlik Air Base in Turkey is responsible for 75% of American military air cargo going into Iraq. Turkey has provided training for Iraqi diplomats, political parties, military officers, and security forces, contributes to NATO's Iraq training mission, and is active in reconstruction efforts within Iraq. In Afghanistan, Turkey twice commanded the NATO-led International Security Assistance Force. That's our war in Afghanistan. Turkey led the forces twice. Turkey also supports a provincial reconstruction team, provides both counter-narcotics and military training to Afghan security forces, and is active in reconstruction, including building and operating several hospitals. In addition to Iraq and Afghanistan, Turkish peacekeeping troops serve shoulder to shoulder with our men and women in the Balkans. Turkey is central to American energy security by providing alternative supply sources and routes around Russia and Iran. Turkey also remains a critical partner of our ally Israel. Together, Turkey and Israel are essential to America's security interests in the region and stand as beacons of democracy in a dangerous Middle East. Finally, I urge my colleagues to think carefully about the impact of this resolution on our Iraq policy. For those members of Congress who want American troops to leave Iraq and come home as soon as possible, as I certainly do, please think carefully about the impact of this resolution on our troops in Iraq and Afghanistan. Where will tens of thousands of American troops redeploy from when they do finally leave Iraq? Mr. Chairman, it is my hope that today's debate will lead to renewed effort by this committee and Congress to focus on reconciliation between Armenians and Turks that will lead to open borders and healthy bilateral relations between Armenia and Turkey. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
It gives me special pleasure to call on my friend from Missouri for the first time as a returning member of this committee, Mr. Blunt.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry to be returning to the committee under these circumstances. Joanne Davis was a great member of Congress and a great example of courage. I well remember the last week I saw her on the House floor, and it was clear that this challenge she was facing was a very difficult challenge for her, but she was still here doing the work that she was elected to do as long as she could. I'm also pleased, Mr. Chairman, to return to the committee with you and Ms. Ross-Layton and my many friends on either side of the aisle on this committee for the work the committee does. I've been concerned, Mr. Chairman, about this resolution for some time. I had no sense until yesterday that I'd actually be voting on this resolution in the committee. And I respect the comments that have been made on both sides of this, and it's clear that there's no partisan division in this committee on this issue, but clearly there are two strongly held points of view. I'd repeat the comments that the chairman started the hearing by reminding our friends again that 8 former secretaries of state, in fact all of the living secretaries of state, including Colin Powell and Madeleine Albright, have urged us to drop the resolution, saying, quote, it would endanger our national security interest in the region, including our troops in Iraq and Afghanistan, and damage efforts to promote reconciliation between Armenia and Turkey. I also, Mr. Chairman, would like to add for the record of the committee just one paragraph from a Washington Post editorial this morning titled, Worse Than Irrelevant. Perhaps I'm doing that because I so seldom get to quote the Washington Post in a way that I agree with, but the last paragraph of that worse than irrelevant editorial this morning say, with some reaching out to both sides of this argument, I think, as members of this committee are today, supporters say congressional action is justified by the refusal of the Turkish government to accept the truth of the crimes against Armenians and its criminalization of statements describing those events as genocide. It's true, again continuing to quote the Post, that Turkey's military and political class have been inexcusably slow to come to terms with that history, and virulent nationalism, not Islamism, may be the country's most dangerous political force. But Turkish writers and intellectuals are pushing for a change in attitude, and formal and informal talks between Turks and Armenians are making slow progress. A resolution by Congress would probably torpedo rather than help such efforts. Given that reality and the high risk of vital U.S. security interests, the Armenian Genocide resolution cannot be called frivolous. In fact, and again, continuing to quote the Post, its passage would be dangerous and grossly irresponsible. I think, Mr. Chairman, that while there's never a good time to address this issue for the reasons that have been mentioned, this is a particularly difficult time, again, for reasons that other members have brought to the committee, and I'll be voting no as my first vote on this committee in some time, and I thank you for the time.
Thank you. The gentleman from New York, Mr. Elliot Engel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, in many ways, I wish this resolution was not before us today. Turkey has been a loyal and faithful ally, and from our point of view has acted more than responsibly in Iraq, the Middle East, and the world at large. Turkey's population is overwhelmingly Muslim, but Turkey is a secular state, has good relations with Israel, and is a democracy, and has been a country that the U.S. is proud to call a friend. Indeed, Turkey shows that there is another way for majority Muslim states than radical Islamic fundamentalism. On the other hand, Mr. Chairman, it's not to be denied that genocide did happen to the Armenian people. It was the Ottoman Empire who created this genocide, not Turkey. Turks today are no more responsible for the genocide that happened nearly 100 years ago than young Germans today are responsible for the Holocaust, which happened 60 years ago. Germany acknowledges the Nazi era and moves on. The U.S. is close friends with Germany. I believe that Turkey should acknowledge this and move on as well. I don't support reparations or land claims or anything that might grow out of this resolution, but I do support the fact that genocide is genocide, and there's no way of sugarcoating it or cleaning it up or pretending it isn't there. People suffered greatly, and the best way to move on to the future is by acknowledging what happened in the past. And so, Mr. Chairman, with a heavy heart, I will vote for this resolution today. But I think that sometimes we really need to reconsider or consider whether some resolutions that we vote for can indeed be counterproductive. I yield the remaining time that I might have to Mr. Sherman, who's asked me for a few minutes of my time.
I thank the gentleman from New York. We're asked why we should act now. Turkey will be a better ally if we speak truth to Turkey, and Turkey will be an even better ally if it speaks truth itself. But another reason to act now is very personal. Mr. Ackerman introduced us to 4 survivors. They fled to this country after the genocide. This is their last chance to see the country that gave them refuge take a stand of truth and to speak truth to power. And that's why we can't put this off. They're here today, and we need to show them that this is a country that acts based on morality, based on the truth. I yield back.
Gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Tancredo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, when I last voted on this particular resolution a couple of years ago, I thought I made it clear, at least I hope I did, that would be the last time I would be voting in favor of it, in hopes that our 2 friends in this dispute would come to some resolution of this on their own, and that we were not, I believe, doing anything productive in the continued discussion of a resolution of this nature. So I am today going to vote no. I do not know how deeply we need to look into the dustbin of history to find how this, I guarantee you this committee could spend all of its time that's allotted doing exactly that, looking into the dustbin of history at every imaginable wrong that has been committed by every imaginable, or in fact real empire that has long since passed away, whether it is the Ottoman Empire, the Japanese Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, or indeed the Roman Empire. I mean, we could go on for a long time condemning the atrocities committed under each of these regimes. It is not productive. It is no longer productive to do so today. I voted against. I was one of 2 to vote against the Japanese, the resolution we had condemning, asking the Japanese to step up to the plate with regard to the comfort women situation. Again, it was a different government, a totally different situation. We should, I think, use our time more productively. I certainly believe that the atrocities have been committed, but as was mentioned by Mr. Royce, they are fully documented in our archives. There is nothing that this committee can do to make them either go away or to sugarcoat them. It only, unfortunately, in discussing this resolution, can make the situation worse. So I reluctantly will be voting no on the resolution. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. We have live votes on the floor. The committee will stand in recess, and we shall resume immediately upon the conclusion of the votes.